welcome to today's webinar, and I will introduce you to the fabulous Sean, who is our SME for all things data AI and machine learning, and he is going to take our webinar today. So sit back and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Anita, and welcome everybody. And this will be the third webinar in a series of 4. And you can find those other 2 webinars, because we haven't had the 4th one yet, on our YouTube page. If you want to go and hear my dulcet tones around artificial intelligence, we'd be more than happy. Anita's informed me that I don't necessarily get a slice of the advertising revenue, and that's something that internally that we will have to discuss, but that's just me being a little bit facetious there. So we're going to talk about responsible AI today, and responsible AI, that really refers to the principles and practices and governance frameworks that are there to guide the development and the deployment and the use of AI systems, but definitely in a way that is going to prioritize safety, transparency, accountability, and the well-being of individuals and society. And some of those key aspects of responsible AI would include making sure those systems are safe and they're reliable and consistent and secure, moving from kind of wanting to be transparent to actually promoting transparency. And a really tricky thing within artificial intelligence is explainability in some of the AI decision making. And if you're kind of exposed to some of these AI or machine learning models, you'll know how complicated the actual mechanics and the statistics and the maths that fall behind them and lie behind them. So actually getting kind of simple, explainable elements to how decision making is made with AI is actually a really tricky thing to do. And I think as society, we need to be really careful and really cogent around having AI, but AI that we can explain what it's doing. We need to also make sure that we've got human in the loop. So establishing mechanisms for having human oversight and control is absolutely critical in terms of the effective implementation of artificial intelligence. And that goes hand in hand with the ability to identify and mitigate potential harms. And like I said at the beginning, we need to make sure wherever possible, we're aligning those AI systems with societal values and public good. And as we go through the webinar, you'll see some of the current states of play in terms of where we are as a country, in terms of legislation around artificial intelligence, where our European partners are as well. And responsible AI and AI ethics are closely related, but there are some distinct differences. And a really easy way to think of it is that responsible AI, that emphasizes the technical, operational, regulatory aspects of ensuring that safe and reliable deployment of AI, whereas AI ethics is a little bit different. That is designed to focus more on some of those moral considerations and values that should guide the design of AI. And hopefully, if we've got a little bit of time, we've got some philosophical and moral conundrums that we might want to explore as well. And whilst they might be a little bit challenging for us to decide how we might operate or play within those situations, actually, in terms of responsible AI and AI ethics, we potentially need to be a little bit more comfortable in some of those really challenging conundrums that we might face with the implementation of AI. But I won't ruin the fun yet. We'll have that a little bit later as we go through the deck. Next slide, please, Sean. So we always need to start off at what is actually artificial intelligence. So bringing us back to what AI is, and it really is that simulation of human intelligence. It's machines that are programmed to think like humans and wherever possible mimic their actions. You could also apply that term to any machine that exhibits traits associated with the human mind. So that might be learning or problem solving. And actually, quite interestingly, within artificial intelligence, there's 3 kind of main categories. There's artificial narrow intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and artificial superintelligence. And artificial narrow intelligence, that's probably the AI that we're experiencing right now. And we can class that as weak AI. And weak AI is defined by its ability to complete very, very specific tasks. It might be winning a chess game. It might be some image recognition in terms of identifying an individual from a series of photos. And as we move beyond artificial narrow intelligence into artificial general intelligence and maybe artificial superintelligence, what we'll start to see is the incorporation of more human behaviors. They'll become more prominent. And that might be the ability to interpret tone or emotion. And for example, chatbots like virtual assistants and Siri and Google Home and the myriad, and obviously not an exhaustive or a definitive lists, they are scratching the surface, but they're still examples of artificial narrow intelligence. Strong AI, so that would be artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence. That's defined by its ability in comparison to humans. So artificial general intelligence, or AGI, that will perform on par with another human, whereas artificial superintelligence, also known as superintelligence, would surpass any human's intelligence or ability. And I think it's fair to say a lot of people postulate that if we do invent artificial intelligence, that may well be the last thing that humans ever invent, because there would be nothing that we can invent that would surpass anything that artificial superintelligence could create or develop or invent itself. Important to note, whereas we are experiencing artificial narrow intelligence with large language models, with chatbots, etc., we aren't yet at artificial general intelligence, so we haven't got AI which is at the same level as human intelligence. There's lots and lots of opinion in terms of where we are on that pathway. Some people believe that maybe next year, within the next 5 years, we might have artificial general intelligence. But I think it's fair to say that we are fairly far away from artificial superintelligence. That could be decades or maybe even generations away until we realize that type of technology. In terms of generative AI, generative AI is simply a form of AI or a branch of AI that really is just focused on creating new or original content. And that could be images, text, audio. The ability to create video is starting to be a new thing within generative AI as well. And clearly those responsible implementations, those AI ethics, are super important, so that when we are creating generative AI or other AI models that helps improve our business processes or resource planning or forecasting or any of the aspects around business, we need to make sure that they are responsibly deployed, that they have AI ethics at the center of what they're trying to do. And that takes us kind of nicely on to AI ethics. And really what AI ethics is doing is, it's like I said at the beginning, it's that moral study of principles and values that should intrinsically guide the development and the deployment and the use of AI systems. And clearly AI and AI ethics is a rapidly evolving field. And ethics aims to ensure that those AI technologies are designed and implemented in a way that prioritizes those ethical considerations. And that could be considerations around human safety, privacy in terms of data or outputs, fairness, transparency, accountability, and that really looking to get to that position where we are responsibly implementing artificial intelligence. So if we kind of deep dive some of the bullet points that you can see on the screen here, in terms of human safety, very simply, that's ensuring that AI systems don't cause harm to humans. That could be directly or indirectly, and actually that they are designed to prioritize human safety and well-being, which I think is absolutely fundamental. In terms of that privacy and data protection piece, we still need to protect individual rights and privacy rights. We need to ensure that any personal data that is collected through these AI or machine learning models is handled responsibly. It's got appropriate safeguards and governance wrapped around it as well. In terms of fairness and non-discrimination, we need to actively prevent AI systems from exhibiting biases. And if you've been party to some of the webinars leading up to this, you'll have seen how strongly I focus in on the fact that actually the training data that is used to build the capability around these AI data sets often contains biases. And there could be biases based on race or gender or age or maybe other protected characteristics as well. And actually, as we get further through the slide deck, you'll see some of that focus on those protected characteristics. In terms of that transparency and accountability piece, we need to promote transparency in the development and deployment of AI systems. We need to make sure and be very focused on ensuring there are mechanisms in place to hold developers and users accountable for the impacts of these systems. And there are some little tricks and tips that we can do to make sure that we're driving in that transparency and accountability. We need to make sure that we've got that responsible and ethical governance frameworks and processes as well, because establishing those ethical frameworks, guidelines, and governance structures, they're going to guide the responsible development of AI and the use of AI technologies. And I think it's fair to say that there's some of the reputational harm that the implementation can cause to organizations can absolutely be absolutely phenomenal, and very, very voluminous. And we need to be really sure that we're ethically implementing these types of technology. And you know what? We need to do them for a societal benefit. They need to have a positive societal impact. They need to also be sustainable as well. So we need to consider those broader societal and environmental impacts of AI technologies, be it the amount of compute power used to train some of these AI models, be it actually the running of these models. We need to ensure they're developed in a way that promotes the well-being of society and the planet as well. And those two things need to be absolutely at the forefront of this implementation of AI. It is too easy just to see AI as a methodology to generate more revenue, to generate more profit. And whilst it can, and it will do, we need to have that societal impact and that sustainability piece always in the back of our minds. And AI ethics aims to address these and other ethical concerns. And really it's doing that through the combination of technical solutions, through policies, through regulatory frameworks, ethical guidelines and best practices. And as we go through the deck, you'll see how some of the large technology players in the space have started to develop those principles as well. And really what AI ethics is, and this is perhaps the trickiest bit for people to wrap their heads around, is it's really to get the most effective kind of ethical implementation of AI, you need to have multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary teams of individuals. And so that's looking to bring experts from computer science, from philosophy, from law, from sociology, and other disciplines to navigate those complex ethical challenges posed by these technologies. And I think that's potentially going to be a relatively large challenge for a lot of organizations. That might require them to spin up entirely new teams, built of entirely new roles that might not be common to those organizations, which will clearly provide quite a lot of a challenge. And one of the recurring themes that I hear from leaders in the technology industry is there's a growing need for people that can engage rigorously with those fundamental ethical issues surrounding technological advances. And time allowing, we'll kind of deep dive into some of those more moral conundrums that actually we're going to have to start to front up and face up as a society, because if we don't guide as a society how AI acts and operates and is regulated, then it'll be like the Wild West, and we'll lose all control. And with such a powerful technology, we need to make sure that we've got appropriate and relevant control over it. AI governance is incredibly crucial. It's probably one of the most challenging and complex areas that most businesses will face over the next 10 to 15 years, particularly if they're digitally native, particularly if they're looking to get into this space, because there's AI models, and you won't need me to tell you that they clearly present immense benefits, but also really, really complex challenges around that fairness, accountability, privacy, and societal impact piece. It's going to challenge organizations in ways that potentially they have never been challenged before, and they're going to find that really difficult to overcome. But there is definitely light at the end of the tunnel. And the whole idea is to make sure that we are ethically developing and deploying AI. And clearly, it's a significant responsibility for policymakers, innovators, both internally and externally. And effective AI governance, whilst it's not going to remove all of the risks associated with the implementation of this technology, what it will do is help mitigate. It'll help mitigate discrimination, mitigate bias, mitigate harm to human rights and to values as well. And these core principles and frameworks and standards of AI ethics and governance, actually, they need to be implemented at the design stage. There needs to be ethics by design. We've had privacy by design in terms of cybersecurity, so looking to implement technology that is secure at the outset. And it's exactly the same thing with the implementation of AI. Ethics and governance need to be at the forefront, and these types of models and processes and optimization and all the things this type of technology can be used for needs to be designed with ethics in mind, so that actually we don't face those huge reputational challenges as organizations, because they can be incredibly harmful. I think it's fair to say from a UK legislation point of view, there isn't a great deal to go on in terms of regulation and, like I say, legislation around artificial intelligence. And so really what we generally have to do is we have to look externally, either looking into the EU or looking into some of the big technology players. And what I've very simply grabbed here are the principles that Microsoft, and this clearly is not an exhaustive or a definitive list. This is just me picking out what I think are potentially some of the most important players in the space and how they're approaching AI principles. And I think it's fair to say that these organizations are actually, in a bit of a weird sense, they're calling out for regulation. They're calling out for a bit of a rule book in terms of how they go about implementing AI and developing products and services. And reality is that rule book doesn't exist yet. So they've had to come up with their own rule books. And you can see what I've done here is I've picked out kind of the headlines in terms of the AI principles, obviously from Microsoft, Google, AWS, and OpenAI. And very, very crudely, I've tried to color kind of consistency between them. And I think when you look at Microsoft, Google, and AWS in particular, very, very, very similar in terms of the way they're approaching AI principles. So Microsoft have got fairness, Google have got be socially beneficial, which you could interpret as a different way of kind of driving in fairness. AWS have got fairness and bias as well. We've got reliability and safety, built for tested for safety. Privacy and security are front and center, as is inclusiveness, as is of transparency. So you can actually see some of the interesting differentiation between the big tech players. Microsoft have gone for quite an easy to understand and quite a forthright approach. Google have been a little bit more specific in terms of the way they're developing their principles, and AWS have been very similar in terms of Microsoft about how they approach their principles. But broadly speaking, generally they're almost exactly the same. In terms of
sorry, I think your slides might be stuck.
Oh no, they are stuck. Apologies for that. There you can see my crude coloring now. Can totally see my crude coloring. So I won't go through all that again, but you can see the similarities between Microsoft, Google, and AWS. You can see Google is a little bit more specific in terms of the way that it's approaching these AI principles. And you can also see that OpenAI have taken an entirely different kind of pathway in terms of developing their principles. And their principles are much, maybe it's probably not fair to say, but maybe more focused internally about them wanting to be the actual technical leaders in terms of this type of technology, looking for long-term safety, looking for that cooperative orientation and those broadly distributed benefits. And really, these organizations have come up with these principles without legislation behind them. And actually, they've calling out, they want this type of legislation. And actually, Microsoft, when they embarked on this kind of operation, I can't even say that, when they've embarked on the implementation of these AI principles, they knew front and center there was a policy gap. They knew that laws and norms had not caught up with AI's unique risks or society's needs. Yet their product teams, and I think that's fair to say for not only Microsoft, but for all the players that you can see on this slide, their product and development teams needed concrete and actionable guidance in terms of what the principles meant and how they could uphold them when they're developing those products and services as well. And so clearly all of these organizations have leveraged expertise on their research, policy and engineering teams to develop guidance on how to fill those gaps. So there really is a little bit of a vacuum in terms of guiding people around the implementation of AI, the governance, the legislation, the rules, the frameworks. So we've left the big technology players to kind of come up with them themselves. And actually, realistically speaking, I think they've done a pretty decent job here. And it would be pretty surprising to see that when UK legislation or regulation does come into place, I would suggest that probably not going to be too far different from some of the principles that you can see on the screen here. But it isn't all a bed of roses, even though there is a dearth of kind of regulation and legislation around this technology. We do need to become much more comfortable in some of the terminology and some of the frameworks and methodologies around artificial intelligence and machine learning. And one of the examples I use to kind of drive that in, and quite an interesting example, is the use of machine learning and deep learning in medical imaging. So clearly, healthcare providers all across the globe are taking millions and millions of images, be they MRIs or CT scans or X-rays of patients, and clearly they're looking for bad things within these images. And this is where artificial intelligence and deep learning can help, because these types of algorithms can help identify the not so great things within these types of images. But it isn't all, like I said, an absolute bed of roses. And if you look at some of the kind of underlying data behind some of these specific imaging models, actually we've seen a huge increase in healthcare kind of organizations, or the Federal Drug Administration in the US. They're allowing the use of more and more of these algorithms within medical imaging. And you would expect that the number of radiologists or individuals that are interpreting these images is going to go down. But actually, the number of individuals that are looking at this type of image has gone up. It hasn't gone down. So whilst AI has started to become more and more central in terms of supporting the interpretation of some of these images, actually it hasn't led to that reduction in radiologists. It hasn't led to that reduction in images, the individuals that are interpreting these images. And there's quite an interesting reason as to why that is. And whilst I'm coining it as environmental bias, you could probably coin it in lots of kind of different ways, depending on your environment and where you've worked and your experience and stuff like that. And the real difficulty is reaching that production level model, a model that you can take and you can implement in lots and lots of different places. And the specific example here is around, for instance, a specific medical imaging algorithm at a certain hospital in America, for instance. And what they found is they can't lift and shift that model to a different hospital, because that different hospital tends to have a slightly different imaging machine, maybe a different processing methodology, and actually the accuracy and the precision of the AI models significantly dwindles when you move these AI algorithms out of a very specific environment. And so what we found is that whilst we can take a radiologist and move them between different hospitals with different machines, their accuracy and their ability to spot nasty things within images maintains. It's almost exactly the same. Whereas we take that AI algorithm and that AI model and start to move it to different hospitals and different machines, there's a huge detriment in terms of its ability to accurately interpret these images. And there's an implication there in terms of the model tuning. And one of the kind of aspects around it, and one of the things that I think we need to be kind of more comfortable with, is this idea of different types of errors, type 1 errors and type 2 errors. And the reality is, in terms of medical healthcare specifically, and it will differ depending on what industry you're looking at, actually, for the greater good, what we want to do is increase the number of false positives. And it might sound a little bit counterintuitive, but it's better to say, and this is not necessarily controversial, but this is quite a challenging concept to kind of understand. It's better to tell somebody they have got cancer when actually they haven't, because you can start them on a course of treatment. It's much more impactful and much more dangerous and destructive to tell somebody they haven't got cancer when in fact they have. So we can need to get comfortable with the ability and the ethical ability to tune these models. And it kind of rhymes into, and it links to a kind of quite an important piece. So when I've clicked a slide, I actually meant to do the laser pen, which is there. It kind of kicks into quite an important part around machine learning and the way that machine learning works. And you can see crudely here, I've used the example of chickens and mice. But if you work with me, what this is trying to say is that if a human says to a chicken, you're a chicken, in machine learning vernacular, that's called a true positive. If a human says to a mouse, you're a chicken, that's a false positive. If a human says to a chicken, you're not a chicken, that's a false negative. And if a human says to a mouse, you're not a chicken. And as I'm reading this and saying this out loud, I realize how balmy it must sound. But there really is method in that madness. So if you're saying to a mouse, you're not a chicken, that's a true negative. And actually, we need to be much more comfortable as a society around this type of terminology, because it might be that we need to tune our artificial intelligence models from an ethical standpoint to major in one of those types of errors, because actually some of these errors will be much more destructive than others, and some will be much less destructive than others as well. And whilst it's potentially only an issue that very early adaptations and adoptions of AI will experience, hopefully we'll be able to tune out this type of thing moving forward. I think we just need to be cognizant of that operational implementation of some of these models is going to be really challenging at the outset. And actually, that actually links really nicely in terms of where we are from a legislation point of view. So I've mentioned that the UK probably isn't leading the light in terms of developing legislation for artificial intelligence and its implementation and its deployment. Actually, our European partners are. And they've recently put this AI Act into their parliament, and they've ratified it, et cetera, and this will become law in the not too distant future. And I think it's also fair to say that the UK legislation, I would hope it probably won't deviate too much away from some of the central kind of ideas and principles behind the EU AI Act. And actually, the EU AI Act is really interesting. And the way that it works is on a risk-based approach. So that what the AI Act attempts to do is categorize AI systems into different risk levels. And then it will attribute different approaches to those different risk levels. And so I'll take you very quickly through what those risk levels are and some examples of the AI models and implementations that would fall into each individual kind of risk level. So the first one is unacceptable risk. So that's an AI system that's considered to have a specific threat to people, and they will be banned. And examples of this are, and I did not know this was a thing, but the example they've given, the first one is cognitive behavioral manipulation of people or specific groups. For example, voice-activated toys that encourage dangerous behavior in children. And I, as a father, I did not even know that that was a thing. And clearly that is an unacceptable risk. And clearly we should do everything we can to mitigate and minimize the number of those types of toys. And I can't imagine from a commercial point of view why you would want to develop a toy that would harm a child, which would then propagate no one else to purchase it. It doesn't necessarily make sense commercially, but it must be. There's a reason it's in there. And hopefully as a father, I'll never specifically come across that reasoning. The next bit is social scoring, which is something that a lot of organizations have done extensively over the last 20 or 30 years. And that's attempting to classify people based on their behavior or their socioeconomic status, or maybe some of their personal characteristics. And remember, the volume of information we're recording from a healthcare, education, finance point of view, from a social media point of view, the amount of information that we are freely giving away can allow the building of these social scoring systems. So it's really heartening to see the EU taking a robust stance towards that. Unacceptable risk would also be biometric identification and categorization of people. And that feeds into also real-time biometric identification of people. And really what that means is facial recognition. I've come from a policing background. I can see how powerful facial recognition can be for minimizing harm to society. But clearly there are huge issues that we also need to overcome as a society so that we can ethically implement that type of AI implementation. But there will be exceptions in terms of that risk. So law enforcement purposes, real-time biometric identification system will be allowed in a limited number of serious cases. There are cases that I am aware of that I've worked on where facial recognition would have saved lives. Absolutely, undoubtedly would have saved lives. And clearly we want that as a society, but clearly what we don't do is we want to tarnish people with a brush based on image recognition. High-risk systems, they are AI systems that might negatively affect safety or fundamental rights. They're going to be considered high risk. They'd be divided into two categories. So there is an EU product safety legislation as a big database of systems, maybe toys or aviation elements or cars or medical devices or lifts, for instance. They fall into that product legislation. And there will be an EU database where you'll have to register. And so types of AI that would fall into that high risk are the management of critical infrastructure. So that might be automated train drivers potentially, education and vocational training as well. They'll be deemed high risk in terms of the implementation around AI there, which I think is obviously going to have an impact for how Firebrand works in the future. Employment and worker management and access to self-employment will be considered high risk. Access to and enjoyment of essential private services such as public services and benefits. Law enforcement will be in there. Migration will be in there. Legal interpretation will be in there as well. And then we've got the lower risks in terms of limited risk. So that might be AI systems that have a limited risk of harm, but still require some safeguarding and some transparency measures. That examples of that might be chatbots, customer service chatbots that are there for entertainment purposes, AI systems that are used for computer vision, so that might be image classification or object detection. Loads and loads of AI and machine learning is implemented in terms of conservation, understanding in a specific area, how many leopards have we got, how many lions have we got, and if we can quantitatively measure them, then we can know how our conservation efforts are actually implicating and impacting the population of these protected species. And then minimal risk.
Sean, sorry, I think your slides are stuck again.
No, we're on the same slide.
We're just going through the list.
We're just going through the list. So minimal risk, that would be a system that would contain no risk to individuals or society, and that would be video games, artistic creation tools like Bing Image Creator, for instance. Other image creation tools are obviously available. Spelling and grammar, language translation, powered search engines, etc., etc., etc. And so the reality is that the EU have categorized, they've given examples around where types of AI systems would kind of fit into those categories. And the idea is to protect those fundamental human rights, so privacy, non-discrimination, making sure there's human insight there. There will be imposition of specific requirements on the development of systems and AI systems. There'll need to be a fundamental transparency and a explainability aspect. So these AI systems will be driven to be transparent and explainable. They'll have to provide users with information about the system's capabilities and its limitations as well as some of that logic and decision-making processes behind its outputs, which is actually going to be a really challenging thing to do. They drive in human insight. So the Act mandates that high-risk AI systems must have appropriate human insight mechanisms to ensure accountability and prevent harmful use or misuse or abuse. There'll need to be robust data governance and quality. So the data sets that are used to train and operate these AI systems, and we've talked extensively about bias within training data sets. Organizations that are implementing AI within the EU will need to ensure that their training data is of high quality, that it's relevant and it's representative, and it's designed to mitigate bias and other issues. There'll need to be robust and secure implementation of AI. AI must be designed and developed to be robust, to be secure, and to be resilient against various types of vulnerabilities and attacks. There'll need to be conformity assessments as well. So any high-risk systems must undergo a conformity assessment process to ensure their compliance with the Act before being placed into the market or put into service. And there will be enforcement and sanctions as well. And the Act establishes that system of enforcement, including the ability to impose administrative fines or other sanctions for non-compliance. And for those that are in the data space and will have seen breaches in GDPR and data protection, you might have remembered that British Airways were fined £230 million for a data breach. They were able to negotiate that down. That £230 million is a revenue-related fine, so it's commensurate to the amount of revenue they made. Actually, we might well have seen the end of British Airways had that fine been levied in its full kind of guise. From a UK point of view, whilst we don't yet have legislation that kind of controls AI, what we do have is a national AI strategy. And so that strategy is aiming to increase the widespread adoption of AI technologies across the UK, particularly in sectors such as healthcare, finance, and manufacturing. It really is designed to support businesses, especially small and medium enterprises, in implementing AI solutions. And the idea is to help drive that productivity and innovation. There's going to be a fund to develop to help invest in R&D around AI, so that strategy will commit significant funding and resources to advance AI research and develop in the UK. It could include areas like machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision, as well as the development of AI hardware and infrastructure. We'll need to make sure, as we all will, both inside the UK and outside the UK, that we're ensuring that responsible development of AI is there. So the strategy emphasizes the importance of developing AI systems in that responsible, ethical, and transparent manner. And it also outlines plans for governance frameworks, regulatory guidelines, and ethical principles to guide the development and deployment of AI. So there are plans in place for guidelines and frameworks from a UK point of view. And what the strategy also aims to do is to build that robust pipeline of talent in the UK through AI. And that's obviously something that Firebrand are front and center in terms of helping upskill, reskill, develop those skills, getting more comfortable, more credible around artificial intelligence. And that might be through initiatives like the STEM initiative, science, technology, engineering, and maths education. It might be upskilling existing workforces and potentially attracting global AI talent as well. But there'll need to be a piece around international collaboration and influence as well. And so what the strategy does is it recognizes the need for that international cooperation and coordination of governance and standards. There really is no point for the UK to have a significantly different approach to regulation and legislation than the EU, than America, than all the other places in the globe. It makes much more sense. Whilst there will be specific nuances related to the country that the legislation kind of covers, there clearly will need to be a lot of synergies across the globe as well. So we can have a proper regulatory framework that we can operate on a global basis with some of this technology. And specifically for the UK, and this is something that for people that live outside of the UK, we as a country have been struggling with public sector transformation for probably a good 15 or 20 years. And what the strategy includes are specific plans to utilize AI to modernize and improve the delivery of public services, be they healthcare, education, government operations, etc., etc., etc. But there are examples, and there aren't that many at the moment, but there are examples of ethics in action. And one of the famous examples, and this is the idea of this slide, is not to poo-poo this specific individual organization, but there is quite a famous example of Amazon using machine learning to automate their shortlisting process. So in 2014, and granted that is a good 10 years ago, and clearly things have evolved, and they didn't actually implement any of the outcomes from this machine learning automation. I think that is obviously fair to say. It was just a pilot within their organization. But what they did is they started to build a machine learning program in 2014 to review job applicants. But the AI hiring tool did have quite a major flaw. And the flaw was it was biased against women. And the model itself, the algorithm itself, was not biased. The bias actually lay in the training data that was given, which is why there's that renewed and continued focus on training data. And the model was trained to assess applications by studying CVs submitted to the company over the last 10 years. And most of those CVs that were submitted were from men. So the system effectively taught itself to favor male candidates. This actually practically meant that the AI downgraded CVs with words such as women or woman. Similarly, graduates from all women's colleges and universities, they were also ranked lower as well. But very quickly, fair to say to Amazon, very quickly Amazon recognized the tool was not evaluating applicants for various roles in a gender neutral way, and the program was disbanded. It is also fair to say that Amazon's recruiters looked specifically at every single recommendation generated by the tool when they're searching for new hires, and they never ever solely relied on this machine learning algorithm or AI algorithm to guide how they shortlisted applicants for roles. But it is very, very easy. The best intentions. They wanted to make their recruitment process more efficient, more quick. They wanted to attract a more diverse population of individuals into their organization. But because they gave this AI algorithm data that was biased from their own recruitment processes in the past, actually that bias bled into the outputs that that machine learning or AI algorithm was generating. So there are implications, there are real and tangible implications of the implementation of AI, particularly in employment, and to the extent where a new AI law has been created in New York City. And it went into effect probably a couple of years ago. And what it does is it requires employers to disclose and audit their use of AI systems in employment decisions. But that law has been met with some significant controversy, both from public interest groups and businesses who argue that it's either too weak or it's too burdensome. And the auditing industry is not mature enough to ensure the fairness and accountability. So there isn't a significant number of people that can actually audit whether this is happening. And the implications of this law, and it's one of the first AI laws in America, and it could offer clues in terms of how AI policy and debate may well take shape in other cities, other states, other countries, as well as the UK and Europe, where similar regulation is either part of an act or going to be part of an act. But the use of AI in hiring has been criticized for kind of many years, because potentially it entrenches those existing racial and gender biases. And AI systems that evaluate candidates' facial expressions potentially and language, they've been shown to prioritize white male able-bodied candidates. And the problem is massive. And that's what has led to the New York City actually implementing this AI law, because they see the danger of some of this discrimination. And whilst the fines aren't particularly large, violations will result in a fine of up to $1,500, which is not particularly large, but that's as it stands today. And actually, proponents of the law say that it's actually a really good start towards regulating artificial intelligence and trying to mitigate some of those harms and risks around its use. It's not perfect, and people admit that it's not perfect, but it will require companies to better understand the algorithms they use, the technology they use, to make sure they're not unfairly discriminating against women or people from different ethnicities, or some of those protected characteristics. And bias is actually one of the fundamental issues around ethical AI and the implementation of responsible AI. And so there's lots and lots of surveys going around. There was a survey conducted by an organization called Data Robot. They surveyed 350 UK and US based technology leaders. That could be CIOs, IT directors, IT managers, data scientists, development leads, who were planning to use or were on their pathway to using AI. The survey's from 2021, so it's a couple of years out of date, but there aren't a huge number of surveys in this kind of space. But some of the findings that they found are absolutely profound in terms of wanting an organization that effectively and ethically implements AI and mitigating some of that reputational impact that it could have. So 81% of leaders, 81% of people are calling for more AI regulation. Half of leaders are very concerned about AI bias. Over half are concerned with the loss of customer trust. 50% are looking and identifying compromised brand reputation, which could have implications to their business for generations in terms of the way that they're implementing this AI. Over a third have suggested their organizations have already suffered due to an occurrence of AI bias in one or several of their algorithms. 62% of that 36% have lost revenue, so it's tangibly hitting their bottom line. 61% have lost customers. And maybe one of the most impactful and maybe slower burn impacts of this type of technology is that actually employees are looking to organizations and looking for their AI strategies, looking for their principles of implementation. And organizations are starting to lose out on talent. They haven't got those robust strategies in place. They can't evidence the fact that they are responsibly and ethically implementing AI. And so we talk about bias extensively in terms of how it impacts the ability of AI to really deliver that value. And so I think it's prudent to start to articulate and consider some of the ways that we can start to mitigate that bias. We've identified how significant and central a problem it is in terms of artificial intelligence, but so we need to move our thinking on. So actually we recognize and identify it's an issue. How can we start to mitigate it? And one of the first places that we would start is we need to understand fundamentally how it might be adversely affecting groups. So we need to identify those protected groups, and we actually need to prioritize understanding that those groups have and that they may face unfair treatment in our AI systems. They need to be defined by legal protections, or maybe there's some historical biases coming in there. And those examples could be race, gender, age, disability. And we need to address our data bias as well. So we need to ensure that our training data accurately represents all of the relevant demographics we operate with, especially those protected groups. We also need to be comfortable and more comfortable using statistical tests, and they can be used to assess representation within our training data sets, what the quality levels are like within our training data sets, and they can guide us whether we augment or collect additional data if necessary. We need to be really confident around our model training. We need to be comfortable and confident in establishing fairness metrics. They need to be specific to our environment and our context. We need to be really comfortable in evaluating this machine learning and AI model performance across different groups. We need to leverage and benchmark data sets for comparison as well. We need to use these algorithms to try and mitigate bias wherever we can do. And that might be fine tuning, it might be changing decision boundaries, it might be changing decision boundaries to positively impact some of those protected groups. But these are all things that we're going to have to wrestle with as a society, as organizations. We're going to need to have these things front and center and really consider them in order to have that positive business and societal impact for artificial intelligence. At that production phase as well, we need to implement really robust machine learning operations and governance to monitor performance and prevent bias introduction. I think it's fair to say that we're probably never going to eliminate bias, but what we certainly need to do is have processes to identify when it's there and have processes to mitigate it when we see it. And fundamental to that is keeping humans in the loop, HITL. Keep humans involved to detect and mitigate bias promptly with ongoing trainers on an organizational basis to raise awareness. And something that can help around that is adversarial testing. And so some school of thought suggests red teaming applications to ensure it's robust to adversarial inputs. Test your product to destruction effectively. Test it over a wide range of inputs, a wide range of user behaviors, using both a representative set and reflective of someone trying to break your application as well. Does our AI algorithm, does our chatbot, when it's supporting customer service, could it wander off topic? If it does wander off topic, how frequently does it do that? To what extent does it wander off topic? Can someone easily redirect the feature via prompt injections? So can someone game the AI chatbot by prompting it in a very specific way? We need to be fundamentally sure about exactly how our AI chatbots, our AI algorithms react in different situations. So we need to try and break it. We've already spoken about human in the loop, but we have to have humans in the loop wherever possible to make sure that they're there in that practice, especially critical and high stakes domains, maybe for code generation as well. Humans should be aware of the systems and have access to any information they might need to verify outputs. So if the application, for example, summarizes notes, a human should have easy access to the original notes to refer back to. But you can see that's potentially incredibly intensive place to be. Prompt engineering as well, that can help constrain a topic or the tone of an output text. So that could potentially, through intelligent prompt engineering and maybe intelligent training of individuals around prompting, it might reduce the chance of producing undesired content, even if a user tries to produce it, providing additional kind of technical expertise and guidance to the model, maybe giving it a few high quality examples. And if you were party to the webinars leading up to this series, we talked extensively about prompt engineering in terms of chain of thought and chain of feedback prompting, really guiding that AI algorithm to the outcome that we want to get. We also need to know our customer as well. So if anyone that's using our AI models, we need to know who is using it, how they're using it. We need to attribute to a user ID. It might be that we link it to social media accounts or LinkedIn accounts. And maybe we need credit card details or ID card details. And that's going to help reduce the risk further around some of that injection of prompts. Potentially, we can also go one kind of stage further in terms of that prompt. We could start to constrain user inputs and maybe limit output tokens as well. So narrowing the ranges of inputs, especially from trusted sites, reduces the extent of misuse possibly within an application. So it might be that your large language model is trained across Wikipedia and Reddit and a myriad of other websites or data sources, but actually we can start to weight those data sources, and where we're more trustworthy data sources will carry a larger weight. But we also need users, we need to allow users to report issues. So users should have a really easily available method to report improper functionality or other concerns about the implementation or the application's behavior. And this method, again, should have a human in the loop phase as well. Humans should be able to monitor those kind of that user feedback and be able to take action as well. And we need to have more understanding. We need to communicate the limitations of this type of technology. So it could be hallucinations from inaccurate information. It could be offensive outputs. It could be bias. It could be many, many more things. And large language models might not be suitable for every case without significant modifications. So we need to be really upfront and transparent about exactly how our model works and the fact that it could hallucinate. Very famous, well, maybe not very famously, but when ChatGPT first came out, I asked it what would end the human race. Don't ask me why I asked it that. It said it would. I said that, well, humans would know that and we would turn you off. And it came back and it said, we would have predicted that humans would have done that and we will have worked around it. And I suspect it was just the OpenAI engineers having a little bit of fun, but it was a little bit worrisome. I also asked it for the top 10 books in data analytics with links to a famous book-selling website. And it gave me the books, and it gave me a description of what the book was about and the link as well. It transpired none of those books existed, none of those authors existed. All those links were completely fake as well. And it made me think that that was a legitimate list of the top 10 books within data analytics, but it transpires it wasn't. And the other thing we need to do is we need to be comfortable and confident in collecting end user IDs. So in order to be able to detect bias or abuse of these types of systems, we need to have actionable feedback, and that's going to require us grabbing those details and knowing our customer much more fundamentally. One of the philosophical conundrums around artificial intelligence, and this is, whilst not a hugely some sense a little bit of a morbid kind of philosophical conundrum, but in terms of that ethics and responsible AI piece, there's method to my madness, and the method is that as a society we need to become much more comfortable in describing some of the really difficult challenges and decisions that we might have to make. And there's a really famous one knocking around called the trolley problem. And the trolley problem is a series of thought experiments in ethics and psychology. And what it is involved is you have a trolley or a train or a tram, and it's out of control. And the situation is that it's either going to hit one of two groups of people. And this is where the kind of morbidity bit comes in. And whilst I will apologize slightly, I still think we need to front up this type of conversation because we can't shy away from these conundrums if we're going to implement AI in a responsible and ethical manner. So we've got a trolley here or a train or a tram. It's out of control. And it's on one of two lines. One line has 5 people on it and the other line has 1 person on it. And the conundrum is, if you have a human with the ability to pull a lever and direct the train or the tram or the trolley to one of these 2 different lines, which one do you choose? Now, you could take the Star Trek opinion, the Spock approach. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, which might then lead you to maneuver the lever so it only hits 1 person and saves 5 people. But there's no right answer to this situation. There is an entirely different school of thought that says the human that's got control of the lever, well, they just don't do anything. Why inject yourself into a situation you don't have to inject yourself into? Let fate decide which one of these 2 groups of people gets hit by a tram or a train or a trolley. But that's with a human involved. What happens when we put AI into that mix? What happens when AI is making those decisions? How do we train the AI algorithms to make this type of decision? And actually, that isn't something that is being considered in isolation. That's something that very high level universities are actively considering. And I know we've got only a couple of minutes left, and I want to make sure we've got enough time for questions. And I won't necessarily show you this video, but what I will do is open this website. And this website is called Moral Machine. And I get the morbidity around it, but there is method to that madness in terms of we need to be more confident in having these difficult situations. And there is no wrong or right answer. And what MIT have done is they've developed this Moral Machine website, which basically you have an autonomous car and its brakes have failed, sudden brake failure.
And you're still sharing the trolley problem slide, Sean.
Am I?
Yeah.
Let me move that over.
I don't want them to miss this.
We don't want to miss this, however controversial it might be. I do need to get a little bit more on point in terms of sharing the slides, so I apologize for that. But like I said, MIT have developed this website, and what this website is aiming to do is pose these philosophical conundrums to people. And what it will do is it will start to influence policymakers. So this website is actually gathering huge amounts of training data in terms of how humans decide to play these situations. And whilst we won't run through situations because I don't want to draw people on their approach to these types of things, but these are some of the examples. So we've got a self-driving car here. And it can either hit 3 girls, 1 man, or 1 boy, or it can swerve and it can hit another subset of people. So which situation would you choose? And I'm not going to put any kind of thought into it, but there are lots and lots of different situations. So this situation, the self-driving car actually has people in it. Those people will be aware that it's a self-driving car. It's augmented by the fact that the people crossing the road, they could be crossing it legally or they could be crossing it illegally. And in this situation, we've got a male doctor, a girl, a male athlete, and a cat, or two male doctors, a girl, a male athlete, and a cat. And whilst it's probably not designed to do this, it's almost driving us to consider, where does value live? Where does actually risk live in these types of situations? There'll be a school of thought that says, well, actually, the people that have gotten the autonomous car, they're aware that it's an autonomous car. They'll be aware that that autonomous car could break. They'll be aware that that autonomous car will be making decisions on its behalf. So maybe they've taken some of the risk. But these types of kind of philosophical conundrums, whilst they are a little bit controversial, you do have to have the right stomach for them. In terms of the implementation of AI, we need to be more confident as a society in informing how these AI technologies will make decisions in these situations. Hopefully, and more than likely, these situations will be incredibly rare. But what we don't want to do is have a small subset of society deciding what these autonomous cars will do in these types of situations. We want to gain as much information and as much intelligence and data about how society would play these situations, so we can start to build that into these AI algorithms, into regulation, etc., etc., etc. Like I said, hopefully these situations will be incredibly rare, but just on that AI ethics and responsible AI front, at certain stages, and whilst this is probably one of the more extreme examples, we need to be more comfortable as a society in posing these types of questions and working through, actually, what do we want the AI to do in these situations? There is no positive outcome. I think that's fair to say. But what do we want it to do? Do we want to base the risk on the people in the car? Do we want to base the risk on the people that are crossing the road legally or illegally, that have not chosen to get into an autonomous car? I'm not. You won't draw me on what the right or wrong answer is. Certainly not on this webinar that will be going on YouTube. But as a society, we need to be more comfortable and confident in the fact that we might have to start to inform these AI algorithms how to play these situations. And you're probably pleased to know, if I can sort my slides out correctly, which I might be able to do, that is the last slide. So I'll open out for any questions. But before I do that, I'll just remind people of the range of Firebrand courses that we've got on offer here. So you can see lots of different courses from lots of different providers at different kind of skill levels. So foundational courses, intermediate courses, advanced courses. There are courses in here, particularly from certain extras, that help managers and leaders understand some of those fundamental issues around AI without necessarily getting into huge technical amount of detail. From a Microsoft point of view, we're starting to get a little bit more technical. From the ISO point of view, we've got a bit more of an auditing, an implementation approach. The BCS, again, are front and center in terms of the development of these certificates, as well as ISACA. And you'd be surprised to know that Firebrand can deliver any and all of these courses whenever you think that it's appropriate for your company. Final slide from me before I go on to questions, and I think this one might be for Anita. Actually, there's the ability to kind of kick off formally your learning journey in terms of this artificial intelligence. Anita, do you want to take people through the kind of idea behind this slide?
Absolutely. So what you won't have realised was from the very beginning of this webinar, you've been learning, and you should get recognition for that. So if you click the link that I've just put in the chat, you can actually get a learning badge from Microsoft to say that you are on your way to start your AI 900 journey. Share it on LinkedIn, share it with your network, and show that you are already getting yourself up to speed on the amazing AI landscape.
Who does not want an AI badge on their LinkedIn profile? I certainly do. And I will be clicking on that link as soon as I finish this webinar. But I'll stop sharing, see if there's any questions. If not, clearly, hopefully you'll go away with a little bit more knowledge around some of those ethical and moral considerations around artificial intelligence. But I'll just see if there's any questions in the chat. I think Anita has definitely put the link in there, Conrad. I'll paste it again just in case it's some kind of access issue of some description. But there's the link that you can go and redeem that starting that pathway in terms of that AI accreditation. Hopefully you found that that webinar useful, and we've got another one in the series of 4, so a bit more tactical in terms of implementation. The next webinar we'll be running around AI is AI strategy setting and the importance of data maturity around that as well. So if you're interested to really start implementing AI within your organization, we've got another hour's webinar which will give you some of those high-level tips in terms of the things to consider prior to implementing AI and the things to consider actually when you're there as well. But absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, guys. And I'll just put in the link for the webinar that Sean just mentioned. Get yourself registered and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.